Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and recently I finished Season 2 of the live-action One Piece on Netflix. And if you have not checked out that series, I highly recommend it. A while back, I even made Buggy's hat from the same show. In this season, they put out another fan favorite, Tony Chopper, and I thought it'd be really cool to bring his hat to life. Now, this is made out of HD foam, which you can find over at Blick Art Materials, but I took it a step further and I covered it with cloth, I had fur ears, and I even 3D modeled the antlers. Now, I do have free templates for this available over on my website, and you can make these antlers out of foam or foam clay, but if you have a printer at home, you can download the STLs and print them off yourself. Now, another thing that I love about these types of projects is, yeah, you could make Chopper's hat, but you could also use these patterns to create your own custom top hat. So, I want to show you what it takes to put Chopper's hat together. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start by crafting the brim of the hat, which is going to be made up of part A. The first layer we're going to use is going to be some 10mm foam. Now, if you plan on covering the hat with cloth, I would recommend to add an additional 6mm. And if you're just going to make it out of foam, I'd recommend to add an additional layer of 10mm. Whether you're using the 6mm or 10mm, we're going to adhere these layers together using some weldwood contact cement. Then I'm able to trace my pattern on top so I can cut through both layers at the same time. And I do make sure to note the dots and the interior cut for my head. You're going to need to cut this shape so that the brim of the hat fits you properly. From here I can take the brim over to my sanding station and clean up the interior cut using a rotary tool. With the brim assembled, I'm now going to turn to part B, which is going to make up the upper section of the hat. This is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Now, if you're wanting to use this pattern for a different type of hat, you can always increase or decrease the height of this piece to get a variety of different looks. After heating the foam, more contact cement is going to be used to adhere the back seam. To give this seam a little bit of additional strength, I super glue a small strip of 2mm foam to the inside. Noting these dots from earlier, this is going to help me line up part B onto the brim. So I start in the back by using a little bit of super glue. By gluing small sections at a time, it allows me to better control the overall placement. This helps me ensure that I have the correct spacing all the way around the hat. To create the very top of the hat, I'm going to take part C and trace and cut that out of some 6mm foam. Now, instead of gluing it into place, I'm just inserting it into the top of the hat. Then by adding some super glue to the rim, I can glue the entire top of the hat down to some 6mm foam. So from here I'm going to trim away the excess foam by first using some scissors. Then I can switch over to a rotary tool to round over the top and the brim. And if you were just wanting to make a top hat that you could customize, you could stop here. But I'm making Chopper's hat, so I have a few more accessories that I need to add to the build. Part D is going to make up the antlers that are going to go on either side of the hat. Option number 1 is to create it out of foam, and you can do this by stacking foam and then sanding it to the correct shape, or by creating a metal armature and making it out of foam clay. Option number 2, I created 3D models of the antlers that you can download and print off at home. Using my placement dots again, I'm able to line up exactly where the antlers need to go on either side of the hat, and that's approximately 3 inches up from the brim on my build. Now, I could glue the antlers to the outside of the hat, but for additional reinforcement, I'm going to glue small strips of 6mm foam to the inside. The part C piece was glued above these strips for reinforcement. Using a Forstner bit, this will allow me to drill through the outside of the hat until I reach the 6mm strip. The hole is slightly smaller than the antler, which is going to help me in the end to glue these into place. And if you're going the foam route for everything, the ears can now be created using part E and some 4mm foam. And here's a basic mock-up of how it's looking so far. But I'm going to take my hat a little bit further. I'm going to cover the entire surface with some fabric. This is a cost-effective blanket that I was able to find on Amazon that works great, and I'll have a link for it down in the description. The first thing I did was trace around part A, adding about 1.5 inches of additional material around the outside. Now, of course, to secure this into place, I'm using high-temp hot glue. I started in the back, and I'm slowly working my way around the brim, only gluing down small sections at a time. After the top of the brim had been secured, I can then start to work around the edge. The same process is going to apply to the upper section. I added about 1 inch more of material than what was designated on the template. That way, after all the fabric has been glued down, I can trim away the excess to the top of the hat. I also added about 1 inch to the outside edge of my part C template as well. Now, when it comes to fabric, I am by no means an expert, and I'm sure there's an easier way to do this. So if you're more comfortable by sewing these and then attaching them to the hat, by all means, take that route. After the fabric along the top had been glued down and trimmed, I could then add a little bit of glue and use a wire brush to help blend that edge. Now luckily for me, the fabric is supposed to look kind of distressed and ratty, so the seams on all of these areas don't have to be technically perfect. I also cut the fabric using part A for the bottom of the brim. And the big thing to note here is the interior hole for the head was cut fairly small, and that's because I'm going to cut darts into the fabric and wrap it up into the interior. This will help to give it more of an overall finished look. But make sure to take the thickness of the fabric into account when cutting the hole in the foam for your head. After the fabric's been glued in, it's going to be a lot more difficult to trim that back. To help clean up the edge, I also used a hair trimmer. With my fabric added to the hat, I can now start to work on the antlers. And the first thing I'm going to do is drill into the base of each and insert a screw to give me something to hold on to. After some basic sanding, I'm going to mix together some PVA glue and some distilled water. This is going to be mixed together and then brushed onto the surface of the antlers using a chip brush. Once the adhesive has become tacky, I can then add some woodland scenic snow as flocking. This helps add an additional texture to the antlers, mimicking the look in the live action series. Now this can be a messy process, so I would definitely recommend to have some paper down to catch the excess snow. While I allow these to dry, I'm going to work on the cross on the front, which is going to be made up of part F. This is going to be traced and cut out of some 2mm foam. Because I want this to also look like it's made out of cloth, I'm going to use some 3M90 spray. This will be applied to the foam and some white fabric. Once the contact cement had dried, the two mediums can be pressed together. Then it's as simple as trimming away the excess material from the 2mm foam. To simulate the stitching, I need some thicker gray thread, but I've only got white. So I'm going to dye it using some Liquitex Heavy Body Mars Black and a lot of water. The thread can then be submerged into the liquid and left to dry. After the thread had been allowed to completely dry, I could then sew it into the cross. Sewing some faux stitches into the cross is a nice touch before hot gluing the cross to the front of the hat. The glue in the snow on the antlers has completely dried, and to paint it I'm going to be using some Rust-Oleum Flat Burnished Amber. The little brace on his antler is going to be hand painted using some Liquitex Heavy Body Iridescent Rich Silver. With the screws removed, I can now start cutting through the fabric to reach the holes that I had created earlier. Using some Bob Smith superglue, the antlers can now be adhered to either side of the hat. Because I'm going for that realistic look, for my ears I'm going to be using some faux fur. My Part E template is traced onto the back lining, and then carefully cut out on the back side with a hobby knife, making sure not to cut the fur. A small strip of 4mm foam is then glued to the interior of each ear. This will help it round over, but it's also what's going to allow the ear to attach to the hat. Using my hobby knife again, small slits are cut on either side underneath of the antlers. Once the foam had been pulled out, I could then add some adhesive and the ears could be glued into place. This was a really fun project, and it was more of a challenge than just making it out of foam. Now of course you could use all these patterns, make it out of foam, and just paint it with acrylics. But if you want to take your props to that next level, it's nice that that option is always on the table. And I hope you enjoyed this build, and if you are building any of my builds, be sure to tag me at SKSProps on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD Foam.